So that's Jean Piaget, right? So then we talked about Lev Vygotsky. Okay, Vygotsky was a constructivist as well. He relied much more less on biology and more on social experiences. And some of the things that he talked about, and we talked about in class, was this idea of a kind of the buzzwords of Vygotsky is this idea of zone of proximal development. Now, what exactly is that zone of proximal development? I like to think of it as if you think about it on a continuum. Okay, so we have this continuum. My arms are the continuum, right? Um, we have on one end, we have their independent practice level, things that the student can do all by themselves independently. And on the other end of the continuum, we have the things that they can do if they have assistance, if they have a tutor, they have a teacher, instructor, somebody that they're a coach, somebody that they're to help them meet those, to be able to do what we want them to do, right? So we have the independent level. We have what they can do with the assistance of a teacher, coach, or tutor. Then we have this gray area in between. Okay, that's kind of the zone of proximal development. I can do these things, but only if I have a teacher or someone that will help me out with it. Okay, so think about that in practical terms as a teacher. How do I assess somebody's zone of proximal development? Well, the truth is, it's really after the fact. So it's kind of if I have 25 students and I got to test each student and work with every student individually, that zone of proximal development, finding what that ZPD is, kind of cumbersome, kind of lengthy, probably not the best tool for me as a teacher. Now, luckily, what we have is we have a lot of instructional manuals and we have a lot of experience, and we take a look at our instructor materials as teachers, and we kind of know when students are in fifth grade, sixth grade math, we kind of know the area that they'll struggle with and kind of know where most of the students are. We kind of know the gray area or the zone of proximal development just based on prior experiences, right? So we use that as a reference for us as teachers. Now, what we do as a teacher, from Vygotsky's standpoint, another buzzword is this idea of scaffolding. Now, you guys have heard of the term scaffolding, and people use that all the time. What is a scaffolding? Okay, well, from a construction standpoint, it's easy. Okay, I want to paint the third floor. I can't reach the outside of the building, third floor. I need to create a mechanism put up in place to help me reach the third floor as I paint it. I put up the scaffolding, right? What does that do? So it acts as a support system for me to reach those high floors, right? It's the same thing in learning. Can't do it by myself. I need support. I need someone to help me. They scaffold me as I go from the low level to the higher levels. Now, we do that in all forms of instruction, from coaching and in teaching. We scaffold our kids all the time. That's not a hard problem. That's the easy part. Helping our students learn how to do new things, that's the fun part of teaching. The trick, as I said in class at one day, was how do I pull the scaffolding away? What happens when I pull the scaffolding away? All right. Well, if I pull the scaffolding away too quickly, that means they do the problem once, they do it twice. I say, you got it. Of course, the kids always say, yeah, I got it. And then you change up the problems and you pull the scaffolding away, and then suddenly the students are like, oh, crap, I don't know how to do this. And they make a bunch of mistakes. Well, what happens then? They make these mistakes and they feel like crap, and they're like, I don't get this. Their self-efficacy drops. They're thinking that their ability to complete a task independently, that drops. So now they're like, I can't do this. So now I got to go to the teacher and I got to get more support. All right. So what happens is, as a teacher, is we pull the scaffolding away too quickly, and they fall and they fail and make mistakes, and they don't feel confident in themselves, and now they doubt themselves. Well, that happens. Then the flip side of that is sometimes we stay too long. We enable the students. We say to the students, hey, anytime you need help, anytime you're having an issue, just come and talk to me. And they do all the time, and they never learn how to do something independently. Well, if they never learn how to do it independently, how do I build on that? The constructive nature of learning from Piaget or Vygotsky is they've got to build on prior knowledge. Well, they never stood up on their own 2 feet. So if they haven't stood up on their own 2 feet, then How do I know what their basic independent level is? So that's the real hard part as a teacher is I've got to teach these kids new stuff. But they got at some point in time show me that they've got this new stuff. Once they have that new stuff, then I create a scaffolding, a mechanism to push them up higher. And so that's the fun part of teaching is scaffolding. The hard part is knowing exactly when to pull the scaffolding away and make the kids stand on their own 2 feet or 4 wheels, as my case might be. But that's a joke because I'm in a wheelchair. All right. Anyway, so Vygotsky talks about scaffolding, the importance of scaffolding. It all starts with knowing where they're at, knowing what their schemes are, knowing what they can do, setting an objective, setting a goal for where we want them to be, and then figuring out the curriculum, the teaching methodologies to get them there. Once they get there, they've got to do that a bunch of times independently. That's why we use homework and we use worksheets and we use a lot of stuff. Homework. We ask them to do this stuff independently, show me that they can. Now I know, I feel comfortable that they can do it. Then I go on to the next stage. So Piaget or Vygotsky talks about the idea of the zone of proximal development. He also talks about scaffolding. They both talk about the uses of language, and the book talks about that as well. The use of the language. Piaget might see some of this as being a bit immature. Vygotsky talks about the importance of speech. Essentially, speech you go from a social speech to this private speech, which it really serves as a mechanism to coach yourself, to scaffold yourself. I use the example of putting together a computer table. We pull the box out, we get all the parts out, and as we're doing it, if it's novel and we haven't done it before, we find ourselves saying, okay, A, where's part A? Here's A goes into C. We're talking out loud. Why? Because we haven't done it before. We're coaching ourselves, we're scaffolding ourselves, and we're just talking our way through this process. And as we do this a bunch of times, we become less vocal. It turns to an inner speech. We don't need to do that out loud. We just kind of do it, right? So you'll see a lot of times kids are working together on projects, doing things. You'll see how they use speech as a mechanism to scaffold their own learning. Vygotsky also talked about how they differ. Piaget and Vygotsky differ in some ways. Is talking about the social experience. Vygotsky believes that you could speed up cognitive development by putting the kids in the right groups, in the right dynamics where kids that are more advanced are working with younger kids who are less advanced, and through their social interactivity, the social activity, that those kids with less knowledge, less skills, they're going to learn from the more advanced ones, and that you can kind of speed up cognition through putting the right kids together. That makes sense. I mean, there's certainly truth to that. Anytime we're working with people that are more advanced in an area, we learn from them. They show us different ways of doing stuff, and it really kind of can speed up this learning process. Makes total sense. But that doesn't mean that you can speed up cognition to a point where suddenly you go from learning your ABCs to reading Shakespeare in a matter of months, right? There is some biological obstacles, okay? And that's what Piaget really kind of would contend is that there are some roadblocks, there are some obstacles, there are some maturational barriers that are going to stand in the way. And that's why you see those shifts in the stages from pre-operational to concrete to formal, that their ability to think abstractly is a real qualitative shift. You can't just tell the kids to think abstractly. They have to have the ability to think abstractly, okay? And so that's why something like fractions is oftentimes a real difficult concept for many young kids to understand. You can teach them how to solve multiply 1/4 times 1/4. Okay, you just multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators, you get 1/16, right? they can do the mechanism. They can multiply the fractions. But you ask a third grader, what is a fraction? You might find that they really struggle with the abstract nature of the part to whole relationship to be able to describe that. They just kind of know what to do. They think like, I know what a quarter of a cookie looks like, or I know what half a pizza looks like, or I know what half a glass looks like. They understand fractions in from a conceptual standpoint. What a quarter of a pizza looks like, what a half a pizza looks like, what a whole pizza looks like. But when you start talking about multiplying and adding or dividing fractions, holy crap! Now you're going to find that that abstract nature of proportion suddenly creates some real obstacles. So there is a mechanism in place, and that's kind of like I said. Piaget says, "Hey, you can teach them how to do stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have a real understanding of what it is that they're doing, right?" So, as teachers, we have to think about how do we use Piaget, how do we use Vygotsky, okay? And in the book, they give you some strategies at the end of in place as far as what do we do with this, okay? Well, one of the things was if they're both constructivists, that means we got to put them in activities where students have to build on prior knowledge. What does that mean? I got to kind of know where they're at. I got to know what their basic schemes are. I got to know what their experiences are like. I've got to create new experiences that build off of prior experiences. That means when we're talking in history class and we're trying to relate things to wars that took place in Mesopotamia or in Persia, blah blah, and the kids are like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, that's probably not going to be a really good example to build from. But you talk about examples that they've either seen movies about or they know of certain battles that have taken place. Well, if you're trying to build on prior knowledge, you got to have a common knowledge to build from. You also have to think about, since it's constructive in nature, we got to put kids together from different perspectives. Kids with different experiences, kids that look at things maybe a little bit differently. Those are great opportunities for kids to build on prior knowledge or to create a whole new body of knowledge. Um, so, having kind of pulled it all back together, the idea is what do we do in our classrooms that will make will put those kids in a position where they'll have to create new schemes. Well, they'll have to make accommodations, that they'll have to, for learning to take place, they'll have to accommodate. Well, we have to set up those conditions. So anyway, that's the first videos. I know it's just kind of a recap of what we did the week before spring break, but I just wanted to kind of get one out there as a first video, kind of get some feedback, see what people have to say, make sure everybody can access the material. Look for a email that I'll send later. I'll send later tonight, and kind of walk through kind of what we're going to do going forward. So this week we're going to start talking about, and we actually have started talking a little bit about some of the behaviorist principles and stuff like that as it relates to learning, and that's kind of where our next video will focus on. All right, have a good night.